Imagine for a second that you are the most famous artist on the entire planet. Like, you haven't just mastered your medium, you've completely defined a whole era of entertainment.
Right, your name is basically a brand at that point.
Exactly. It's printed on posters in every major city in Europe. And then at the absolute height of your power, at just 37 years old, you just walk off the stage.
You just pull the plug entirely.
Yeah. You never make a major public work again for the next 40 years.
It is, honestly, arguably the most dramatic disappearing act in the history of art. I mean, you spend your entire youth clawing your way to the top, and the second you arrive, you just vanish.
Welcome to today's deep dive into Gioachino Rossini. You might know him as the Italian Mozart, the undisputed master of comic opera.
Yeah, he's the guy who permanently stuck the William Tell Overture and the Barber of Seville into our cultural DNA.
Right. But our mission today is to skip the standard, dusty timeline. We're looking at the massive hidden contradictions of his life, because the man behind that bubbly, energetic music was, well, living a reality that was completely at odds with his art.
The contrast is honestly jarring. You hear his music, which has been used in literally everything from Bugs Bunny cartoons to car commercials, and it's the sound of pure, unadulterated joy.
Totally.
But the life that actually produced it was riddled with scandal, debilitating depression, incredibly toxic relationships, and just a profound, life-altering burnout.
And to really understand the severity of that epic burnout at age 37, we first have to understand the insane velocity of his early career. I mean, this guy was an absolute machine.
Oh, without a doubt.
Just to start with a fun quirk, he was actually a leap year baby, born February 29th, 1792, so he only had a real birthday once every 4 years.
Which is, perfectly appropriate for him because he basically lived his 20s at 4 times the speed of a normal human being. By the time he hit that fateful age of 37, he had churned out 39 operas.
39.
Yeah, 39. That level of output is just staggering when you consider the sheer volume of music required for just one full-length opera.
I'm really struggling to square this circle, though, because I read that he bragged it took him about 4 minutes to write an aria, noting that it was, like, roughly the time it took to boil a portion of rice.
Yep. He was that casual about it.
He even claimed you could hand him a laundry list and he could set it to music. So, I mean, was he just a cynical content machine?
That is the million-dollar question, Brett. To answer it, you really have to look at the environment he was operating in.
Okay.
The operatic centers in Italy at the time, Venice, Milan, Naples, they functioned a lot like modern content mills.
Like churning out viral videos today.
Exactly. The impresarios, who were the managers running these theaters, they demanded constant new material to keep the seats full. Composers weren't treated like revered, untouchable geniuses.
They were basically glorified gig workers.
Yes. And Rossini survived this absolute meat grinder by adopting an incredibly pragmatic approach. Like, if an overture from a flop in one city went to waste, he wouldn't hesitate for a second to pull it from the archives and slap it onto a brand new opera in another city.
Ah. So he was reusing his own thumbnails and templates, basically, just beating the 19th century algorithm.
That is a perfect way to look at it. And to make sure those recycled pieces hit the audience hard every single time, he developed this signature technique.
The famous Rossini crescendo.
Exactly, the Rossini crescendo.
I always hear that term thrown around. How does a Rossini crescendo actually work, like mechanically speaking?
Well, it's this brilliant psychological trick. You take a simple, really catchy musical phrase and have the orchestra play it very softly.
Okay.
Then he repeats it. But this time, he adds the woodwinds. Then he repeats it again, a little faster, adding the brass.
So it's just layering.
Right, layering and building. Then the percussion kicks in, the strings play louder, the tempo accelerates. He builds and layers the sound so methodically that it physically raises the heart rate of the audience.
Oh, wow. So it's a physiological response.
Totally. By the end of the phrase, the theater is just in a state of absolute frenzy. He was so good at this manipulation that audiences literally nicknamed him Signor Crescendo.
But even a machine misses sometimes, right? Because the Barber of Seville is basically the gold standard for comic opera today. But I was shocked to learn it completely bombed on its opening night in Rome.
Oh, it was a spectacular disaster. But not because the music was bad.
Why then?
The Roman audience was fiercely loyal to an older rival composer named Paisiello, who had previously written an opera based on the exact same story.
Oh, so it was like stepping on someone else's intellectual property?
Yeah, pretty much. Rossini actually titled his version Alma Viva to try and avoid stepping on toes, but the local crowd just viewed it as arrogant disrespect.
So they were basically ready to hate it before it even started.
Exactly. They came to the theater specifically to ruin him. They hissed, they jeered,
Yeah.
they disrupted the entire performance.
Man, that has to be devastating for a young artist. But he doesn't seem to take it too hard, which brings me back to my question about his, true devotion to his art. Because there's this legendary story about his emotional priorities that I absolutely love.
You're thinking of the turkey.
The turkey, yes. He openly admitted that he had only wept 3 times in his entire life.
Right.
The first was when his earliest opera failed. The second was when he heard the legendary violinist Niccolo Paganini play. And the third, and apparently most tragic, was when a beautifully prepared, stuffed, truffled turkey fell off his boat and drowned in the water.
The greatest tragedy of his life was culinary, not musical.
I mean, you have to respect the honesty.
You really do.
Yeah.
He was a legendary gourmand. In fact, if you go to a high-end French restaurant today and order Tornado's Rossini, that incredibly decadent dish of filet mignon topped with foie gras and truffles, that is literally named after him.
No way. I had no idea.
Yeah. He loved the earthly pleasures, but that insatiable appetite for life, for food, and especially for romance is the exact mechanism that triggered his downfall.
Right.
His personal life collided with his professional world in a way that eventually destroyed him.
Looking into the mechanics of that collision, because it really starts in 1815 when his career takes him to Naples. He meets this man named Domenico Barber, who is described as a powerful impresario. But for someone unfamiliar with that term, what kind of power are we really talking about?
Think of Barber as a cross between a modern-day major record label executive, a Broadway mega producer, and a mafia don.
Oh, wow. So he ran everything.
Everything. He controlled the gambling tables in the theater lobbies as well as the talent on stage. He was formidable. And he hired young Rossini to write these grand series operas for his absolute star attraction, a soprano named Isabella Colbrand.
I want to pause on Isabella Colbrand because she isn't just any singer. She is considered the greatest coloratura soprano of her era. What makes a coloratura so special?
So, a coloratura soprano specializes in music that requires incredible agility. We are talking about rapid-fire trills, huge vocal leaps, and incredibly high notes.
Like vocal gymnastics.
Exactly, vocal gymnastics. It is immensely physically demanding, requiring peak conditioning of the vocal cords and the respiratory system. Colbrand had this mind-blowing 3-octave range.
That's insane.
She was a living marvel. And crucially, she was also Domenico Barbaiz's mistress.
The boss's girlfriend, the absolute star of the theater, and Rossini, the charming new composer, just boldly steals her. He marries her right out from under the most powerful man in Neapolitan entertainment.
Yep, they became the ultimate 19th century power couple. And in the beginning, the dynamic was actually so tilted in her favor that people in Naples mockingly referred to Rossini as Signor Colbrand.
Because she was the established icon and he was just the upstart.
Right. But while this partnership produced some incredible music initially, it very quickly devolved into a personal nightmare.
Because Rossini couldn't stay faithful?
Not even close. As Colbrand's intensely demanding vocal style began to naturally take a toll on her voice, her power kind of waned. Meanwhile, Rossini's fame skyrocketed.
So the power dynamic flipped.
Completely. He was constantly traveling on tour, and he cheated on her relentlessly. And the consequence of that infidelity was that he contracted gonorrhea.
Okay, we really need to contextualize that because today, for you listening, that might just mean a trip to the clinic and a round of antibiotics. But in the 1800s, this is a very different story.
Oh, it was an incurable, agonizing, and highly stigmatized disease. The standard treatments back then often involved toxic mercury,
Which is almost as damaging as the illness itself.
Right, it was basically poisoning him. And the true tragedy of this whole love triangle is that he almost certainly passed the disease to Isabella.
The fallout for her is incredibly grim because without her voice and with her health just deteriorating from the infection, she turns to gambling. It becomes a severe addiction. They eventually separate, and she dies years later, completely estranged from him. I read a detail that she was supposedly murmuring his name on her deathbed. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
He did continue to support her financially, but, the emotional guilt must have been such a heavy burden. This was a profoundly toxic environment of his own making.
I am always so fascinated by how humans compartmentalize. Like, how does a man whose body is actively failing him, who is trapped in a disastrous marriage filled with guilt and infidelity, continue to sit at a piano and write the most effervescent, joyful, uplifting melodies in Europe?
Well, the stark reality is that he couldn't keep that wall up forever. The compartmentalization eventually failed.
The cracks started to show.
Exactly. The physical rot from the untreated disease, combined with the moral toll of his lifestyle and just the sheer exhaustion of writing 39 operas in a decade and a half, it finally caught up with him. Which brings us to the year 1829.
Right. The moment the music stops, Rossini is in Paris. He premieres his massive masterpiece, William Tell. It is a absolute beast of a production, running 3.5 hours long.
A marathon.
It drains everything out of him, and then he just quits. Critics later dubbed it the Great Renunciation.
39 operas before age 37, and then absolute silence for the next 4 decades.
I see a lot of historians try to romanticize this moment. Like, they compare him to Shakespeare putting down his pens, suggesting Rossini just woke up one day, realized he had reached the absolute peak of artistic perfection, and gracefully bowed out to enjoy his wealth.
Right, the genius resting on his laurels.
Yeah, but I have to push back on that narrative, because that sounds like PR spin for a man who was utterly terrified and physically broken.
Your instinct is spot on there. The romantic myth obscures a much darker truth. It was basically a perfect storm of external disasters and a catastrophic internal collapse.
So what were the external factors?
Well, the political ground shifted violently beneath his feet. The 1830 French Revolution overthrew the king, and the incoming government immediately slashed spending. They cut off the lucrative lifetime annuity Rossini had fiercely negotiated for himself.
So his financial security blanket is just yanked away just as he's completely exhausted. And the artistic landscape is changing too, right?
Drastically. A composer named Giacomo Meyerbeer was pioneering a brand new style of grand, spectacular opera that was completely capturing the Parisian imagination.
Okay, so a new trend.
Yeah, if Rossini's operas were character-driven comedies, Meyerbeer's were like the CGI summer blockbusters of the 1830s. We were talking massive sets, huge choruses, elaborate ballets, explosions.
Oh, wow. So Rossini saw the writing on the wall, the public wanted spectacle, and he was a master of a rapidly aging style.
Precisely. But the internal collapse is really what physically stopped him from writing.
Right, what was actually happening to his body.
The untreated gonorrhea cascaded into horrific complications. He developed severe urethritis, making basic bodily functions agonizing. This led to debilitating arthritis. Simply holding a pen or sitting at a piano became a test of physical endurance.
Which is devastating for a composer.
And chronic severe pain inevitably alters your brain chemistry.
And that leads to the mental health crisis.
Yeah. The vibrant man who loved truffled turkeys and fine wine spiraled into pathological obesity. He developed chronic insomnia. The symptoms he exhibited, which his contemporaries just casually called melancholy, align with what we would now diagnose as severe bipolar-like depression.
That's so sad.
He would spend days weeping uncontrollably. He suffered from intense suicidal ideation. He was essentially a prisoner in his own deteriorating body, completely paralyzed creatively.
It is such a stark contrast. The purveyor of champagne fizz melodies, the guy known globally for making people laugh and smile, spending his middle age in a dark room, overweight, in agonizing pain, contemplating ending it all.
It's incredibly dark.
It feels like this story is destined for a miserable, tragic end. But he actually finds redemption with an incredibly unlikely person.
Yes. Enter Olympe Pellissier.
What a character. I mean, her early life is a saga in itself. She was a former Parisian courtesan, and it wasn't some glamorous romantic choice. Her own mother sold her to a young duke when she was just 15 years old.
Just horrific. She was a woman who survived the brutal, highly transactional world of Parisian high society entirely by her wits and her resilience.
He had to be tough.
She really did. She had high-profile affairs with major artistic figures. The novelist Honoré de Balzac famously called her the most beautiful courtesan in Paris. She had a relationship with the composer Vincenzo Bellini. She had seen the absolute best and worst of the male artistic ego.
And somehow, this woman with this incredibly scandalous past becomes the anchor in Rossini's life.
Yeah, she wasn't just some starry-eyed fan. She was a survivor who understood exactly how to manage a broken man. She became his devoted nurse and eventually his second wife.
And she basically pulls him back from the brink, right?
Completely. She managed his physical ailments, bathed him, fed him, and created this protective bubble around him. She tirelessly nursed him through his darkest episodes, acting with a level of maternal devotion that completely stabilized him.
And the stabilization actually works. They eventually move to a beautiful villa in Passy, just outside Paris, and Rossini begins his second act. But he doesn't go back to the brutal grind of the theater. Instead, he starts hosting these exclusive Saturday night salons, the samedi soirs.
And very quickly, an invitation to Rossini's Saturday Salon became the most coveted ticket in all of Europe.
I mean, just imagine walking into his living room. Franz Liszt is at the piano. Giuseppe Verdi is having a drink in the corner. Richard Wagner drops by. The greatest minds in 19th century culture are all congregating in this one space.
With Rossini presiding over it all as the genial, generous host, he liked to self-deprecatingly call himself a fourth-class pianist, but when he did sit down to play for his guests, these legendary virtuosos were entirely dazzled by his technique.
But the best part of this resurrection is that he starts composing again. Not 3-hour grand operas for a demanding boss. He's writing just for fun.
He wrote over 150 of these small, intimate pieces for piano, voice, and chamber ensembles, and he gave them a brilliantly self-effacing title, Péché de vieillesse, which translates to Sins of Old Age.
I love that title so much. How did this private music sound compared to the massive operas he used to write?
It was entirely different. Without the pressure of satisfying a paying audience or an impresario, he just experimented. The music is stripped down, often quirky, full of strange dissonances and inside jokes.
And the subject matter was so weird.
Oh yeah, he wrote pieces about butter, about radishes, about taking a train ride. It was highly personal, witty music. And he didn't just write fluff either. He composed a deeply emotional mass called the Petite Messe Solennelle, which he jokingly dismissed on the manuscript as the last mortal sin of my old age.
It's so beautiful that he found his way back to the piano. And I read that this weird private music ended up being hugely influential.
By complete accident. Because he broke away from rigid, bombastic classical structures to write this quirky, personality-driven, minimalist music. He unwittingly laid the groundwork for future generations.
Like who?
Well, composers like Eric Satie, who pioneered a very avant-garde minimalist style in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were directly influenced by the playful, rule-breaking nature of Rossini's Sins of Old Age.
The irony is just profound. The great machine of joy only found true joy in music after he stopped doing it for a paycheck. He literally had to stop trying to please the world to finally please himself.
Olympe really gave him a sanctuary. She provided a physical and emotional space where he could simply be a human being, completely free from the suffocating expectation of being Maestro Rossini.
It's a phenomenal story, and it brings me to a really powerful takeaway for you listening right now. Rossini's life isn't just a piece of classical music history. It is a masterclass in the courage it takes to walk away from something that is actively destroying you. Think about the pressure in your own life, your own career. Imagine hitting the absolute peak of your profession and realizing the environment is physically and mentally breaking you. Sometimes hitting the brakes, retiring, or quitting isn't a failure. Sometimes it is simply making the necessary room to save your own life.
Which raises an important question to leave you with today. We look at that terrifying physical and mental breakdown he suffered and the decades he spent recovering in the care of Olympe.
Right.
If Rossini hadn't broken down, if he had somehow gritted his teeth, pushed through the agony of his illness, ignored the changing trends, and just kept churning out grand spectacle operas to compete with Meyerbeer, would we remember him today as a tragic casualty of a brutal industry?
That's a great
And it
question.
makes you wonder, did those private, quirky little sins of old age actually represent his truest, most authentic artistic self, simply because they were the only notes he ever wrote just for himself?